The morning sun beat down on the vast expanse of the Blackwood family farm, casting long, golden shadows across acres of corn that stood tall and proud like a disciplined army in green uniforms. The air was thick with the scent of turned earth, fertilizer, and the sweet, heavy perfume of impending harvest. Elijah Blackwood stood on the porch of his modest, white clapboard farmhouse, a mug of strong black coffee in his hand, surveying the land that his grandfather had bought as a sharecropper and that he, Elijah, had turned into an agricultural empire. At 72, Elijah was a man carved from the very soil he tended. His skin was the color of deep, rich mahogany, weathered by decades of sun and wind, lined with the map of a life spent in labor. His hands, currently cradling the ceramic mug, were large and calloused, the knuckles swollen from years of wrestling with machinery and livestock. To look at him, standing there in his faded denim overalls that were stained with grease and mud, his checkered flannel shirt with the fraying collar, and his heavy steel-toed work boots that were caked in dried clay, one would see nothing more than an aging laborer. One would never guess that Elijah Blackwood was the largest private landowner in the state, the primary supplier for 3 national supermarket chains, and a man whose bank accounts held more zeros than most people could count in a lifetime. But Elijah liked it that way. He had never been a man for suits or boardrooms. He preferred the honesty of the dirt to the deception of the city. Today, however, the city was unavoidable. The farm's fleet of heavy-duty transport trucks was aging. Old Betsy, his personal pickup from the 90s, was rattling worse than a bag of bolts, and the delivery trucks were spending more time in the shop than on the road. It was time for an upgrade. He needed 10 new heavy-duty haulers and a new personal truck, something reliable that could tow a horse trailer without complaining. He finished his coffee, the dregs bitter on his tongue, and walked down the steps, his boots crunching on the gravel driveway. He didn't bother changing. Why should he? He was a farmer going to buy farm equipment, even if that equipment was sold at a dealership that prided itself on selling luxury lifestyle vehicles. He climbed into Old Betsy, the engine coughing and sputtering into life with a reluctance that mirrored his own, and headed toward the gleaming skyline of the city that rose like a mirage on the horizon. The destination was Prestige Automotive, a dealership that didn't just sell cars, they sold status. The building was an architectural marvel of glass and steel, soaring toward the sky, reflecting the clouds and the ambition of everyone who walked through its automatic doors. Inside, the floor was made of Italian marble, polished to such a high sheen that it looked like a sheet of ice. The air was conditioned to a crisp, floral-scented coolness that banished the reality of the humid summer outside. In the center of the showroom, cars were displayed like jewels in a museum case. SUVs that cost more than a house, sports cars low to the ground and aggressive as sharks, and the heavy-duty trucks Elijah was interested in, polished until they looked too pretty to work. The sales floor was prowled by men and women in sharp, tailored suits, their smiles bright and predatory. Among them was Julian. Julian was the top salesman at Prestige Automotive for 3 months running, a fact he reminded his colleagues of daily. He was a man in his late 20s who spent more on his hair gel than Elijah spent on groceries in a week. He wore a navy blue suit that fit a little too tightly, a watch that was too big for his wrist, and an air of arrogance that filled the room. Julian didn't sell cars. He sold the privilege of being seen in one. He was currently standing near the espresso bar, chatting with the receptionist, checking his reflection in the window, waiting for a whale, a rich client, to walk in. When the automatic doors slid open, Julian straightened his tie, a reflex honed by greed. But as he turned, his smile faltered and then curled into a sneer of undisguised disgust. Entering the sanctuary of Prestige Automotive was not a celebrity or a tech mogul, it was Elijah. The old man walked in with a slow, deliberate gait. With every step, the dried clay on his boots crumbled, leaving a trail of brown debris on the immaculate white marble.
The smell of the farm, diesel, sweat, and earth wafted in with him, cutting through the dealership's signature lavender scent. Elijah stopped in the middle of the showroom, looking around, feeling instantly out of place but refusing to show it. He adjusted his baseball cap, which bore the logo of a seed company, and looked for assistance. Julian watched him for a moment, calculating. In his mind, he saw a waste of time. He saw a janitor, a gardener, or a confused homeless man who had wandered in from the heat. He certainly didn't see a commission. He turned to the new hire, a young woman named Maya who was organizing brochures at a nearby desk. Maya was 22, working 2 jobs to pay for her nursing degree, and she was the only person in the building who hadn't yet had her soul hardened by the commission wars. "Hey, Maya," Julian hissed, not bothering to lower his voice much. "Go handle the trash. Make sure he doesn't touch anything. I don't want to have to call the detailers to clean mud off the leather." Maya looked up, seeing Elijah. She didn't see trash. She saw an elder, someone who reminded her of her own grandfather back in Alabama. She grabbed a bottle of water from the hospitality fridge and walked over to him, her smile genuine. "Good morning, sir," she said, her voice soft. "Welcome to Prestige Automotive. It's hot out there today. Would you like some water?" Elijah looked at the young woman, noting the kindness in her eyes that was absent in the rest of the room. He took the water with a nod of gratitude. "Thank you, child. It is indeed a scorcher. I'm looking to buy some trucks, need to replace my fleet." Maya nodded, opening her mouth to speak, but before she could, a shadow fell over them. Julian had decided that even letting Maya talk to him was a risk to the dealership's image. He stepped between them, his back to Maya, effectively cutting her out of the conversation. He looked Elijah up and down, his eyes lingering on the mud-caked boots and the grease stain on the knee of his overalls. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't offer a smile.
"Sir," Julian said, the word dripping with condescension, "the delivery entrance is around the back. If you're looking for the service department to fix that thing you drove up in, they are fully booked until next month." Elijah took a slow sip of the water, his eyes locking onto Julian's. He had met men like Julian before. He had met them when he tried to get his first loan at the bank 40 years ago. He had met them when he tried to buy his first 100 acres. Men who thought a suit made them a king and overalls made you a servant. "I'm not here for service, son," Elijah said calmly, his voice deep and resonant, like stones tumbling in a river. "I'm here to buy. I need 10 of your Titan X9000 heavy-duty haulers, and I want to look at that limited edition King Ranch pickup over there in the corner." Julian let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of humor. He looked around at his colleagues, inviting them to share in the joke. 10 Titan X9000s? Do you have any idea how much those cost? A single unit starts at $80,000. The King Ranch is over 100. You're talking about $1 million transaction. He stepped closer, invading Elijah's personal space. "Look, I don't know if you're senile or just lost, but this isn't a flea market. We don't do layaway, and we definitely don't take EBT cards for down payments. You are scaring the actual customers. I need you to leave. Now." Maya gasped, stepping forward. "Julian, that's not necessary." "Quiet, Maya," Julian snapped, without looking at her. "Go clean up the mess he made on the floor." Elijah didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood his ground, a rooted oak tree in a storm of arrogance. "I have the money," Elijah said, reaching into his back pocket where he kept his checkbook. "I intend to pay today, in full." Julian saw the movement toward the pocket and signaled to the security guard stationed at the door. "That's enough," Julian said, his voice turning hard. "I'm not going to ask you again. You're dirtying the floor and bothering the clientele. Security." The security guard, a burly man who looked bored, started walking over, his hand resting on his belt. The humiliation was public now. Customers in the lounge were staring, a couple looking at a convertible whispered and pointed. Elijah felt a familiar heat rise in his chest. Not shame, but a righteous anger. He looked at Julian, really looked at him, seeing the insecurity masked by the expensive suit.
"You are making a mistake," Elijah said softly. "A very expensive mistake." "The only mistake," Julian sneered, "was letting you walk in here. Escort him out." The guard reached for Elijah's arm. Elijah pulled away sharply. "I can walk myself out." He turned to Maya, who looked like she was about to cry. "Thank you for the water, young lady. You have a good heart. Don't let this place take that from you." With that, Elijah turned and walked out. The squeak of his boots seemed louder this time. Julian clapped his hands together as if dusting off dirt. "Finally," he announced to the room. "Someone get a mop, ideally burn the mop." Outside, the heat hit Elijah again, but he barely felt it. He walked to old Betsy, but he didn't get in. Instead, he leaned against the rusted hood and pulled out his cell phone. It was an old flip phone, sturdy and reliable. He dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. "Elijah?" a booming voice answered. "I haven't heard from you since the harvest festival. How are the crops?" "Crops are good, Robert," Elijah said, watching the dealership through the glass walls. "But I'm having a bit of a pest problem." Robert Sterling, the owner of the entire Prestige Auto Group, and a man who had started his business selling tractors to farmers like Elijah 30 years ago, paused. "Pests? You need me to send over some traps?"
"Not that kind of pest," Elijah said. "I'm at your downtown branch. Came to buy 10 Titans and a personal truck. But your head salesman just kicked me out. Said I was dirtying the floors. Called security on me." There was a silence on the other end of the line. A cold, heavy silence that was far more terrifying than shouting. Robert Sterling knew exactly who Elijah Blackwood was. He knew that Elijah had bailed Robert's father out of debt in the 80s. He knew that Elijah's contract alone could sustain the dealership for a quarter. He did what? Robert's voice was a low growl. "Told me I couldn't afford it. Humiliated me in front of the whole floor," Elijah continued, his voice steady. "Robert, I'm standing in the parking lot. I'm about to take my business to the Ford dealership across town. Unless—" "Don't you move," Robert interrupted. "I'm 10 minutes away at the corporate office. Do not leave, Elijah. I am coming down there personally." "I'll be here," Elijah said, snapping the phone shut. He crossed his arms and waited. Inside, the atmosphere had returned to normal. Julian was laughing with a coworker, reenacting the scene, exaggerating Elijah's accent and posture. "I swear, he reached for his pocket and I thought he was going to pull out a squirrel or something," Julian guffawed. Maya was in the corner with a mop, angrily cleaning the dried clay, tears stinging her eyes. She hated this place. She hated how they treated people. She looked out the window and saw the old man leaning against his truck. Why was he still there? 10 minutes later, a sleek black sedan screeched into the parking lot, parking diagonally across 2 spaces right in front of the main entrance. The door flew open and Robert Sterling stormed out. He was a man in his 60s, impeccably dressed, but with a fury in his eyes that could melt steel. He saw Elijah and walked straight to him, ignoring the heat. "Elijah," Robert said, extending his hand, "I am so incredibly sorry." Elijah shook the hand firmly. "Good to see you, Robert. You look well. Business must be good if you can afford to turn away $1 million in cash." Robert winced. "Come with me." They walked toward the entrance together, Elijah in his muddy overalls, Robert in his custom Italian suit. When the automatic doors opened this time, the dynamic in the room shifted instantly. The staff knew Robert Sterling. They knew he visited rarely and only when heads were about to roll. Julian, seeing the owner, immediately straightened up, flashing his most charming, sycophantic smile. He didn't immediately register that Robert was walking with the homeless man he had just ejected. He assumed Robert was perhaps being charitable or handling a complaint. Julian rushed forward. "Mr. Sterling, what a surprise! We weren't expecting you. Can I get you an espresso?" Robert ignored him completely. He walked to the center of the showroom, Elijah by his side, and clapped his hands. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Everyone, gather round, now!" The sales team, the receptionists, the finance managers, everyone scrambled to form a semicircle.
Julian stood at the front, looking confused but confident. Maya stood at the back, holding her mop bucket.
Robert put a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Does anyone know who this man is?" Silence. Julian let out a nervous chuckle. "Sir, that's just some drifter. I actually had to have him removed earlier. He was disturbing the peace, tracking mud everywhere. I handled it." Robert turned to Julian slowly. The look on his face made Julian's blood run cold. "You handled it? You handled Elijah Blackwood, the owner of Green Valley Agrotech? The man who supplies half the food you eat? The man who owns more land in this state than I do?" The color drained from Julian's face so fast it looked like he was about to faint. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I didn't... He didn't look like... He didn't look like what, Julian? He didn't look like a commission? He didn't look like money? You judged a man by his boots and forgot to look at his hands. These hands feed this city. Elijah stepped forward, his presence filling the room. He looked at Julian, not with anger anymore, but with pity. "Son, I worked for every dollar I have. I wear this dirt with pride because it's honest. You wear that suit like a costume to hide the fact that you have no substance." Elijah turned to Robert. "Robert, I came here to buy 10 trucks, but standing here now, looking at how this place is run, I think I want to buy something else." Robert Sterling was a businessman. He knew the numbers. The dealership had been underperforming lately, mostly due to customer complaints about arrogance, complaints he now understood. And 20% above market was an offer only a fool would refuse. He looked at Elijah, then at the trembling Julian. "What are the conditions?" "First," Elijah pointed a calloused finger at Julian, "and anyone else who stood by and laughed while I was being thrown out, they're gone, immediately. I won't have people working for me who treat human beings like trash." Julian fell to his knees. "Mr. Blackwood, please, I have a mortgage. I didn't know. Please!" Elijah didn't blink. "You should have thought about that when you were mocking a man for wanting a glass of water. You're fired. Get your things and get out, and use the back door. I wouldn't want you to disturb the clientele." Julian, sobbing, was escorted out by the same security guard he had called on Elijah. The irony hung thick in the air. "Second condition," Elijah continued, turning his gaze to the back of the room. "Young lady with the mop. Come here." Maya froze, terrified. She walked forward slowly, clutching the mop handle. "Me?" "Yes, you," Elijah said, his voice softening. "You were the only one who offered me water. You were the only one who saw a person, not a wallet. What is your name?"
"Maya, sir." "Maya," Elijah smiled. "Put down the mop. You don't clean floors anymore. From this moment on, you are the general manager of this dealership." Maya dropped the mop. It clattered loudly on the marble. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm just a junior associate. I'm still in nursing school. I don't know how to run a dealership." "You know the most important thing about business, child," Elijah said, placing a heavy hand on her shoulder. "You know respect. You know kindness. I can hire people to teach you the math. I can hire people to manage the inventory. But I can't teach someone to have a soul. You have a soul. Robert, do we have a deal?" Robert Sterling looked at the chaos, the fired salesman, the shocked student, and his old friend standing there like a king in muddy boots. He smiled. "Elijah, for 20% over market, we have a deal." They shook hands right there on the sales floor. In the weeks that followed, the dealership underwent a transformation. The pretentious atmosphere vanished. The sign out front was changed to Blackwood Motors. Elijah didn't come in every day. He had a farm to run, but when he did, he still wore his overalls, and he still tracked mud on the floor. But now, nobody looked at the mud with disgust. They looked at it with respect. Maya proved to be a natural leader. Under her guidance, and with Elijah's philosophy of service first, sales second, the dealership flourished. She finished her nursing degree, not because she needed the money anymore, but because she wanted to help people, a trait Elijah admired. One afternoon, months later, Elijah walked into the dealership to pick up his new King Ranch truck. The floor was busy, buzzing with activity. A man walked in, a young construction worker, covered in drywall dust, looking nervous and out of place, clutching a worn hat in his hands. A new salesman, someone Maya had hired, started to walk toward him. Then, hesitating, looking at the dust on the man's clothes. Maya stepped in immediately. But before she could speak, the salesman corrected himself. He remembered the story of Elijah. He remembered who signed his paycheck. The salesman smiled, warm and genuine, extended his hand to the construction worker, and said, "Welcome to Blackwood Motors. Unwind. Take a load off. Can I get you some water or maybe a coffee?" Elijah stood by the door, watching. He took a sip of the coffee Maya had brought him, adjusted his cap, and smiled. The mud on his boots had dried, and a little piece of it flaked off onto the marble floor. He didn't bother kicking it aside. It was just dirt, after all. And from dirt, everything good grows. He walked out to his new truck, the engine purring like a satisfied cat, and drove back to the farm, leaving behind a legacy that had nothing to do with cars and everything to do with dignity.